If anybody hasn't had one of the little pumpkin cake balls yet, please take them because everybody's all finished them. They're really good. Yeah. The coffee is really strong. So.
They know they're educators.
Yes.
They know that.
Yeah, gotta stay caffeinated for the journey. Didn't make the hero's journey chart, but I'm sure it should be.
That's the helper.
The helper part, yeah, exactly. Caffeine. I was sharing notes with Possible. You know, one of the great investments I ever made in my life was an espresso machine where I just push a button and like espresso comes out. It's also one of our, you know, to Colleen's point about not inducing too much anxiety. You know, you really have to be careful with Crystal, I'll just get this up.
Yeah.
Oh, no, take a second. Glad we're having lots of opportunities to have conversations. I think a big part of this is just getting into dialogue with each other. Well, plenty more opportunities over the coming days. But as we get going, so this next bit, we're going to be talking about the national standards and benchmarks for effective Catholic primary and secondary schools, which pronounce the NSBECs. We're very lucky now to have the monarch of all things NSBECs for the NCEA, Ms. Jill Animal, presenting to you. We had a question about Polish heritage, so I think that the one trivia bit is like, can you spell Wielkowicz quickly on or correctly on the first pass? I think I got it right.
No one for my entire life, and I'm in the car. He's like, "Oh yeah, it's a I'm like, "Whoa!" That was as a child and the alphabet, and no one could spell it.
Yeah. So there you go. So that's great. Jeopardy skills. Spell Wielkowicz. So Jill is very accomplished in application of the NSBECs and the tool sets. You're going to be getting a document of which she's one of the lead authors. She's pursuing a PhD at Creighton University and doing a lot of really important research into these standards. So we're very blessed to have Jill in the leadership on the team with us at NCEA. And without further ado, Jill.
Okay, so to be with you, and my journey to this topic was unique because as assistant superintendent in the Diocese of Grand Rapids with Dave Faber, and he will be joining us on probably by tomorrow evening for Mass. You get to meet him. He is like the biggest fan of the NSBECs ever, and I didn't realize that until I was in the job and realized we had everything in Grand Rapids aligned to these standards. And so, like the rest of you, as Catholic educators, I was overseeing curriculum, instruction, technology integration, you know, various projects along the way. But the kicker was, and the one that I just dreaded, was that I was the regional coordinator for accreditations. And at first I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. And then once I got into it, I loved it. But it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to be the one to read all the reports, go on all the visits, check all the boxes, be the bad cop when something was really critical and needed attention, and all those moments. But what I realized was God was preparing me on the journey to here, because I took for granted how much in Grand Rapids everything felt very aligned. Strategic planning, job descriptions, accrediting, everything. And that isn't necessary, but it did help. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. And it's not my job to sell you on the NSBECs. This is not a product you purchase. This is NCA's open source gift to Catholic education. And we're gonna talk where it came from. We didn't start with it because if I started at this level where it was like, where did this come from? You would not have done that work with Colleen yet. And so now that you've seen a fourth of them, there's 4 domains, you've seen a fourth of it. Now you see what a gift it can be, and your wheels are turning on what that might be. So where did these come from? And well, I'll show you the website a little bit more too, because there's a lot more on there that we're going to talk about in this time. But this wasn't that long ago. So in 2012 was the first publication of the standards as they exist. But they came from Dr. Lorraine Ozar and Dr. Patty Wetzel O'Neill. And they teamed up as two gurus on this mission of defining what does it mean to be an effective Catholic school. Each higher ed institution was trying to figure that out for their formation programs, but for Catholic leadership. And meanwhile, accreditations were going on and everyone's kind of finding things their own way. And so they teamed up in research to produce these first drafts. Not too far after that, did the rest of this product line start to emerge and people started sharing it in a very authentic way. So you'll have some of these in your hands in a minute, but a couple years later, we get benchmark guidelines. And then worksheets for schools doing self-assessments. And then we have people coming out of the woodwork sharing the other ways dioceses are doing applications. NCA now has surveys you can use that are aligned, that now we can roll up and have some national data on. How do our constituents describe these areas of growth for our schools? Okay, so a long journey there. A few years back, it may have been CLS in Jacksonville. Don't date me on this, I didn't even pull up the date. The two institutions, because these wonderful women in Catholic education were like, okay, when we walk away from these two institutions, what's going to happen to this document? And that's where they more closely aligned with NCA and said, we think this document should be owned by NCEA. Because all the conversations are happening at CLS, all these things are in the work in our hands. And so over the last 3 years or so, that ownership process evolved into so now they're fully owned by NCA, which means that we can align almost everything to them so people can see it as one clear strategic vision of what makes an effective Catholic school that's helping dissertation processes for those in Catholic education to better define some things that maybe need revision, but also to say, like, does this describe an effective Catholic school in this region of the United States, or for this type of school, or for, all those things. So a lot of research now is starting to stir up under the direction of Amy Smith, who's the VP of Research and Data for NCA, who's brilliant. You'll see her on Tuesday. Okay, so what are these things? There's a lot of words here, but so I'm going to read just this top part for you, because this came straight from the original draft, and that they are statements grounded in church teachings, best practice, and proven success of those committed to the future of Catholic elementary and secondary education in the U.S. It's not a to-do list. You saw that in domain 1. It's like, oh, I'm just going to check these off. Easy, easy peasy. If I do all 70 of these things, we're good. The root of them are the 9 defining characteristics of Catholic education, and I believe that's in the front of your booklet of them, which is great. Unfortunately, sometimes that gets forgotten because you're thinking about the 70, you're not thinking about the 9. So if you need language around the vision statements or around what makes us excellent in Catholic first, those 9 defining characteristics are a great language to steal from. And then the breakdown, so bottom up is we have 70 benchmarks. Get above me. I was an English teacher by trade, and when you go from a Google to a PowerPoint to a Google, it's this stuff. So the professionals. All right, so 70 benchmarks, which roll up into 13 standards. You saw the first 4 standards, which is part of the first domain. So domain 1, mission, Catholic identity, clearly goes first. The next one is governance and leadership. You're gonna hear from Lincoln. So his session is not gonna drill down each one like we did with Colleen, but okay, framed in that mindset. And then we have academic excellence, which is my jam because I love curriculum and instruction. That's all about what's happening in classrooms. And then operational vitality. So we are building our program over the next couple of days around this. But I want to say it again, we're not selling anything to you. This is just, we're like sitting on the shoulders of giants who have done the research to say this does define an effective Catholic school. Okay, if you are thinking, and often I get this email from a superintendent or a school leader who's like, all right, I'm trying to explain to my staff what's going on with these NASDAQs, what do I do? The original webinars are on the website. I'll show you what it is. You don't have to write all this down. They're easy to find on there. It's really funny to watch a webinar from 2012 because it's like you don't see anyone. It's very weird. Like, click the next slide. Like, it's just very strange. But all of the information is there. And Patty and Lorraine now are in the works of telling that story. So the story of where they came from, the original right of it, so you don't miss that history of what happened in the years right before 2012. But if you need the nitty gritty info and you wanted to show those to staff, whatever, they're there. So, okay, so great, they exist. What are we gonna do with them? That's the big question. I just listed some ideas here, but you see them in accreditation processes, Florida and Michigan. It's the whole process. It's the 70 benchmarks and legal compliance checklist for the state and that kind of stuff. But other states and other networks use them sort of a la carte or sort of in their own words, or they use it as the framework to get to their accreditation processes for Catholic schools. Great PD alignment. If you're like, okay, well, why did we bring in that speaker, or why are we running this cohort? You know, if it's important, you'll see some to align there. Having school leaders and boards self-assess their work is incredible. When you hand over to a school board or a diocesan board, standard 5 on governance and standard 10 on finance, they finally have the tools of like, oh, this is what our board can do that. They stand up a little taller, like, oh, well, yeah, we can advise you on that. And suddenly now they're taking ownership that they're not hearing come out of your mouth. They're now seeing it on paper, right? Stakeholder surveys, and that's something, again, NCA can do for you, which is great national data, is seeing how do your stakeholders describe your schools? Do they describe them as effective? And not in general, but broken down to each standard. Where are you? To assess in those moments, we can do that for you or alongside you. Mike Boyle, Dr. Boyle, who will be attending in the next few days, he's also super fan of the NASDAQs. When he came into his role as superintendent in Joliet, he rewrote his job description on day 1 in accordance with the 4 domains of the NASDAQs. He's a great example of that because he wanted to make sure he wasn't losing sight. You could so easily lose sight of the priority list, and he did not want to get caught up in that. So he rewrote it in that way. Principal evaluations. There are some states and some work of how do you evaluate a principal? Is that the role of the central office? In some dioceses, yes. In some dioceses, no. Depends on your governing structure. But you could do evaluation based on the 13 standards. That's not too overwhelming. They are responsible to those 13 areas. It's hard to argue that they're not. Strategic planning processes, back to Dave Faber. His is very detailed. It's a lot of nitty gritty, but you'll see it. Now that you've been in this document, you'll see, oh, those are the 4 buckets. That's why it makes sense in those 4 areas. Higher ed is getting better and better, aligning their courses for preparation for Catholic school leaders to the standards. And then school recognition. So you'll see pockets of dioceses recognizing their schools, maybe as an offshoot of accreditation processes, or if you accredit as a system, but you want to recognize your STEM schools, or you want to recognize mission and Catholic identity excellence, or there are ways you can just pull some based to your strategic priorities. So we've seen a bit of that happening as well. So let's just talk about one of them. And you don't have a presentation today or tomorrow on academic excellence. So this is the way I'm going to sneak it in because standard 7 is all about classrooms and instruction. And so I'm going to hand you 2 additional documents that we have for all 70 of them on the website, just so you have a sense of this. So try to flip in your booklet to standard 7. We're just going to look at standard 7.1. And while we do that, I want to hand you what you can get from our website. So page 1 on here is the rubric. So it's a 1-pager of the 4 levels of assessing this one benchmark. So, think about this. This is what I'm handing you times 70. So it's a lot, which is why we're only in this hour looking at one of them. Okay, so 7.1 is a tricky one because again, I came into the only reason, there's a bigger, higher power reason of why I went from teaching in a Catholic school to assistant superintendent in a Catholic school, which if you ever felt inadequate, like it was week 1 on that job, like skipped over principal. But it was because we were in desperate need in Grand Rapids to rewrite the curriculum standards of our diocese. We were coming off an era of Common Core where our bishop said, we do not teach Common Core in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. But then many years went by and no one defined what we do teach. Like there was just this silent period. And schools are like, I don't know, like we're just aligning textbooks. I mean, it was messy there for a while. And it was desperate work that needed to happen. So I came in, that was project 1 was figuring out what we're just gonna draft them. We're gonna write them, we're gonna do them on Google Docs, and by the grace of God, Lord put these 500 teachers in my care and we're gonna do this together. And they'll trust me because I'm a teacher. We're gonna go right from teaching to this, and we're gonna get this done. But I often think back to, so that first year of accreditation visits, we get to 7.1, and look at that rubric on page 1, everyone was a 1. Every school's a 1 because there was no clearly defined curriculum standards to align anything to. They couldn't be. So they're going into their accreditation visits for 7, 8 years. They couldn't score better than a 1. Okay, so that is a reason, unless they locally decided what they were going to do with curriculum, which some of them kind of did, but not as well as working as a consortium of schools together on what are expectations for curriculum. So when you look, so page 1 is this rubric, and it's a 4-point scale that you see in lots of processes where the 3 is the expectation. So you're going to see at the top 7.1 word for word nearly matches, and most of them they match exactly a level 3. In some, you're going to see some nuances where it's worded slightly different. 4 is beyond. So on an accreditation visit, you're going to see like 5 or 6 of those out of the 70, but just a few, right? And 2s are super healthy. You can be a 2 and be a very effective Catholic school. You're not going to be put out of business on a 2 in some areas. 1 is problematic. 1 is something you need to address, but you're going to have some. You're going to go through 70 of these. You're going to, as a school, you're going to have some 1s, some priority areas. So page 1 is the rubric. And so on the website, there's a 1-pager for every single benchmark. The next page, so if you turn the page, the rest of the packet is giving you more details. And if you flip ahead a little ways, you're going to see there's this great spot that says, to move from a 2 to a 3, what do you got to do? That is a very good action list. And so I want you to take a minute, think about your schools collectively. If you were to assess who you oversee, knowing that in some superintendent's offices, you're an office of 1, and you are probably not touching curriculum because you're doing all the operations and everything else. But think about it, if you were to assess your schools right now, where do they fall on this rubric? And what could you do, or what creative thought is coming to mind out of your element here today? So I'm gonna be quiet for a few minutes for you to just quietly think about this 1, and you can put through and read to it if that helps. you turned your new colleague in Catholic education, your new table mate. You have to shuffle you tomorrow, make sure you don't sit by your new friend. A new friend. Just tell them what's on your mind. What are you thinking about? What's this making you think about? Back home. We'll talk for just a few minutes.
So they went to the training. So, you know, I knew let's start. You know, they're some sort of what you're looking for, you know? So now, of course, if you remember, the 10th was the day that the Air Force. Yes, so they are based in and so they flew from Fort Myers to Fort Worth, and again, I would say that much of their work is predicated on the classical. So it's very philosophical, etc. So we did Zoom. Okay, so there were two teachers, and the only if they were the president, you know, I think it was something. So for my people, and after that, nice go to heaven, but I don't know how they're just luckily he's got brothers there, which hopefully he's yours too. Yes. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
well, then I have some. It's not all bad. So, and then I put a doorbell, and then people said, so, and in Texas.
I want to say a housekeeping thing too as we come back.
There's at least two things.
If you're anything like me, we are all very similar in our roles. It is really hard to sit for a long time. So if you need to stand and listen or wander around, like that doesn't bother us because we're all teachers and we know how that can feel. You know how that feels. Just not bugging anyone if you have a little presentation that's not bothering any of us. So what'd you hear? Like what's going through your mind and what are you thinking about? It could be about 7.1. It could be about anything we've talked about so far. These existing. I think you can benefit from hearing from each other a little.
Talk a little bit about how curriculum seems to have been on the back burner, and that, you know, in many of our meetings, we're walking in and we're wanting to have these conversations, and we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so, in my case, in our diocese, in the diocese of Palma, Southeast Texas, and so the teachers were struggling. They were just trying to decipher the state, teach the state standards,
Yeah.
and they were just at a loss. And so, although we're in the beginning stages of moving forward, this makes me feel good that we're on the right track and we're we're moving forward, and the principals and the teachers are starting to feel better about what they're doing in their classroom.
You say a little bit of like continuous improvement is the goal, like you can never check that off. Okay, we did the curriculum, cross it off, right? This is why continuous improvement is just the ongoing mission. What you're saying though, and it came up on the most recent superintendent call, so we have, if you're missing off that email list, you let me know, but we're just trying to gather everyone on Zoom every month so they can share what's on their mind, but it came up there too. It's just like with everything going on, the regular rhythm hasn't come back yet, but that's why the podcast episode, the NCAA podcast episode that dropped a few days ago on Thursday was all about the superintendent in the Diocese of Erie. Had that conversation with me on the phone. And I'm like, oh, this is a great podcast episode where he's like, I just needed to do curriculum. Like, I just knew I needed to do it. And I don't regret it. The rest of my week is chaotic and crisis response still, but I have dedicated time for us as a staff and for us to do committee work back to, and his is more standard 8 is all about assessments. So him digging into his academic data and then letting that influence curriculum decisions. He's like, I just needed it. I needed that life. And so many of us, not all of us, came into these roles because we loved that part. We were strong teachers who were coached up into leadership, who were coached up into system leadership. But there are days where I'm like, oh, just give me my classroom back, you know? But I think we can find that joy in other ways, and bringing those with energy to the table for those conversations is one of those things. And it's not something again you can check off, but yeah, I'm with you on that. Feeling it across the country on that. What else did you talk about?
So in the Diocese of Fresno, we are very new to NSBECS. And so we're just starting this path, and we've devoted our monthly, an hour of every month's Zoom faculty meeting, because we're geographically expanse, to training and focusing just on the NSBECS. But what kind of stuck out in my mind here is, as we go down this path, they don't have any anchor documents. So I look at our job descriptions, our formal evaluations for both teachers and principals, and they are not aligned to this. So I've got some work to do some alignment that helps support the vision of where we're going, and they've got the connections between what they're doing and where we're going.
And opportunity,
Yeah.
because if they have the language in front of them, they can rewrite those job descriptions with the words or phrases that help that alignment to become really natural. And I'm happy to jump on your Zoom call at any point if you want a little pep talk or something, whatever. Happy to, that's what we do. That's what NCAA is here to do, is support you on these moments. So don't hesitate to do that. Love to do that. What else came up?
What I was thinking about, we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but is making sure that our standards look different than our public school counterparts and have the faith interwoven into that, and then resources for teachers to be able to teach us standards and integrate the faith into all content areas. And that's a big job.
It is. So a couple things. So Colleen and I have both done that work. Happy to guide or just support. But also when we did that work in Grand Rapids, Dave Faber and I agreed it should be an open source document. It should be so good that we can publicly put it out there. Feel free to steal the reference list, steal whatever you need there, because it was very important to our bishop that faith integration happened on in every content area in every grade. It's not an add-on. It's not like page 1. It is woven in, because that was really important to how our Catholic schools run in Grand Rapids. That couldn't be replicated everywhere, right? State, like all that looks different everywhere, but that was locally, that was really important to meeting the needs of our families. What else came up?
I think for me as a new associate superintendent, wondering if the schools are following. So I know that I'm one of those principals who has always followed diocesan expectations, but as I'm diving into this new position, I'm realizing that not everybody sees them as the standard, but maybe as a choice or an option. So I guess pulling our schools together, I mean, we have 3 high schools that are schools to feed into, and I think it's really important that our elementary schools that are feeding into high schools are following that same curriculum, so that that preparation when they enter 9th grade is really systematic.
Those 8th grade teachers want to hear from the 9th grade teachers, because they're saying all day, I'm preparing you for high school, this is what you'll do in high school. They don't really know. You know, I mean, they know, but how often are those conversations happening, and what does your vertical alignment look like? We need to enter them as preschoolers, assuming they are staying, right? I know that's impossible in some moments, but that is our job as a system leader to support that progression without hesitation, without feeling bad about it, that is our job. And so, but they really want to have those conversations, and they're very vulnerable, but it's, yeah, those relationships are our goal. Anything else come to mind? Okay, so in this journey from the document from the NESVEX being owned by Boston College and Loyola University of Chicago to NCA, it was important that there was a council, that there was an advisory council of stakeholders like you all, who were going to make sure that NCA didn't mess it up, but also that there's always a voice of the people, right? That it wasn't just gifted to NCA and we just like proud about it, or that Boston College and Loyola wouldn't be seated at the table if a revision was to happen, to talk about. And so this council is made up of a variety of people. It was created in that transition. This is on that council is higher ed, superintendents, clergy, religious principals, and some of those super users like an accrediting chair from a network, either a statewide network. You know, we need those people at the table. And that's really to ensure the quality and sustainability and fidelity of NESVEX, right? We have rotating turns of members. We are working on updating the bylaws now that the NESVEX are fully owned by NCA. Those can look a little different now. It's not about that transition period, but it's about them being there, being ours, but we need advice. We need to make sure we continue to move this work forward. We take that job very seriously. And so we're always looking for new members. I would never bother someone in the first year of their role to do that. But perhaps you know someone who should be at the table. You know, maybe there's a region of the United States you don't have represented. Maybe there's a higher ed institution that you know totally aligns their stuff and should be seated at the table. It's a great group of people to be rubbing shoulders with as well. So just want to make sure. So and for a future year, I'll go y'all next year to join us in this. So 2 major projects are happening in my hands for this next year or so. One, you get to be in the room for on Monday is Creighton University, out of research that came from 2 faculty at Creighton. The honor of co-authoring with them, what's the subset of standards for system leaders, for superintendents that are aligned to the NESVEX, which was completely what you did earlier with domain 1. What does it mean for me as what responsibility do I have as a system leader to make sure this standard is fulfilled in schools? Now, it's going to be a heated conversation on Monday that you don't want to miss, because we need to know if we did it right. So it's out of research that Creighton did, which you can hear all about Monday. And then we took a stab at a draft. You were on day 1 of being a superintendent or system leader, and this document became your very lengthy job description. Would it accurately describe you on your best year, the best day? So one little plug, a little homework between now and Monday is that we're going to do, so it was in emails. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was an attachment, right? You saw the draft. And then there was a survey attached to that email. Okay. Then, so only those who took the survey's like, what did we do well? What did we not do? Like, what's missing? What are we not thinking about? The initial feedback. On Monday, we're gonna make sure that just those who have gotten to that stage, they read it, they did the survey, then we're gonna sit you at round tables and ask you a second layer of like, what else, and let people feed off of each other and get another layer of feedback. Okay, if not, it's a nice little break for you on Monday afternoon after the presentation of it. We really want to get in the room roundtable discussions going, more feedback to that process. Then Creighton's going to pilot. So we have some superintendents say, yeah, like, let me try this year. Does this describe my work? Does this describe what I'm aiming for? And then we'll have a whole year of feedback from those pilot participants. But we'll resend that email tonight. We'll make sure, our team will make sure that you get that one more time. So you have the draft of it and the survey so that you can fully participate at the table when we get to that next one. We're not trying to offend anyone. It's kind of hard to tell superintendents they can't be at the table. However, we've all been in those conversations where it's like, do your homework, why are you speaking up? So that's what we're trying to observe. So, and then there'll be lots of opportunity for feedback beyond that, but we're looking forward to that. The other is that, we're coming upon 10 years of the NSBECs existing. They're published in 2012. And so the NNC over the last 10 months or so started drafting revisions to the standards. Now you don't get to say, oh no, like I thought I was starting to learn these and then they're gonna change them. We're trying to make them timeless. And that's what I really appreciate out of Lincoln's leadership is like, you're timeless Catholic schools. What about these, now that we're 10 years later, looks like a little, something that doesn't matter. It's a language we don't use anymore. Something very nuanced, like habits of mind is mentioned. Does it need to be, or is that just something on our minds, 8 years ago? So trying to revise for that. And what now, 10 years later, have people interpreted in various ways in different parts of the country? Like everyone's reading 5.6 differently or whatever it is. How can we clear up language? And because a lot of research has happened in these last 8 years. So bleeding off of research studies that have come out of these, we're gonna do some updates. So that's what we're up to. So next year at this time, that's probably the draft, or parts of the drafts you start seeing in front of you. If not sooner, so you can see what we have in the works. It's gonna take a long time before that then becomes a schedule for accreditation processes. We're on 5 or 7 year cycles to roll out, the new version of them. But that's what we need, just like your curriculum documents. It's not a crockpot. You don't set it and forget it. You have to go back. You have to go back and stir the pot and make sure it's still simmering, right? So that's what we're doing, like all of the things. That's really all I had for you in this session. I was going to show you the website. I'm having trouble having it pull up. Let me try it one more time, just so I know you can navigate this with clarity. But I also want to open the floor to questions. Yes.
So, since NCEA now owns the NSBEC, and you're encouraging accreditation to be aligned to that process. Does NCEA have any plans or some part of your vision to be an accrediting agency?
That's the
Because that'd be
question
awesome.
of the year. That's the question of the year. We have smaller commitments. We haven't yet hit that moment in time. And I don't know if you want to jump in to answer that question better than I can.
Yeah, well, there's 7 regional accrediting agencies nationally, and they all do different things with this document. They've all used it to greater or lesser extent. One of them is moving in the direction of doing more, say, public school stuff and less of this, for example, right? So for right now, what we're encouraging is integration to fidelity of the standards into the documents. So we own the copyright, but so far our concern has been more that they're using them well and using the fidelity rather than picking and choosing. And so the document is titled as characteristics, which is the outcome. The really important thing we want to see as you walk on campus to see the outcomes. standards or 4 buckets of things you should be doing to get those outcomes, and benchmarks are like really useful tasks or lists of things you can do to make sure you're headed in the right direction. So I just visited a school on Thursday in Reno, Nevada, a little flower school that just put the WCEA territory. They're the first ones that are doing a trial protocol weaving the NSBEX into their protocol. So we haven't looked at the business model of being an accrediting agency ourselves, and our preference is that other people who are accrediting agencies do that. The only circumstance under which I can imagine us being more deeply involved on the actual side is if somehow one of our 7 friends nationally that manages Go Rogue in a way that's not good for the schools and not good for the church. But that hasn't come upon us yet. So far, the conversation's been around, okay, how do we work with the agencies so they use this document effectively? So did I answer your question?
So you're gonna probably not, but it's a question that continues to be on the table all the time. We're asked that quite often, but I'm gonna add a couple more things. So we also know that you take a state like Florida, who's been using the NSBEX completely, like that is the accreditation, that is these rubrics and benchmark guidelines is the process. They have a statewide system. So like the system for accreditation called a credit track completely has built this thing. Same system, got the web developer's name's Jan. He's doing the same work for Michigan. And now they're sitting on 7 or 8 years of data, almost 10 years of data in Michigan, just using that. We don't need to become those statewide or regional accrediting agencies. But we also have, there's accrediting agencies who are not built for Catholic schools that we're trying to put ourselves in because you need to be accredited. And a lot of people are finding themselves in this moment of friction about that. When I read the NSBEX, I see Catholic schools. I turn the pages and I say, yes, this is what a strong Catholic school is. When you see an accrediting rubric not built for Catholic schools, you flip through and you say, we kind of do that. We don't call it that way, but we do a lot more than this. And that's hard because when we have like a Florida, you don't pay nearly as much to that accrediting organization as you do otherwise. So there's a lot to the complexity of that. And if we become the owner of the expectation and we became the accrediting organization, is that check and balance? There's a lot of philosophical question to that too.
So can I share where that comes from? So I was an associate student in Texas. And so we had our own accrediting agency that's done by the conference, right?
Yes.
Which
We're just talking about Texas.
which does their thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we don't.
Yeah.
And so the accrediting agency that we kind of use is Cognia, which is really public. And then there's an overlay of the identity, which is double work for principals. And then the team that comes to accredit your school doesn't understand your Catholic schools or your values.
I've been on those teams.
And so then the purpose of the accreditation, which is truly to understand, how you are an effective Catholic school gets lost. You are checking boxes.
I know. And then you get this very expensive report back and they're telling you stuff that is not what you're gonna do. I've been there. I've been on that side of the table. I'm like, this is great. But if that's what people have been doing. So Texas has been in conversation with Florida, that's been in conversation with Michigan to say, like, how do we replicate that system for Texas? Or to what extent do they
So
want
Texas
that?
just adopted the credit track.
Oh, yes.
Yay.
So
Yeah.
it looks like they're moving in that direction. I know that's something that the superintendents want.
Yes.
But it's based on the criteria of Texas, not this.
Right, so it's
Okay.
not there yet.
Okay, but same system, so like that's okay, the baby steps, right? It's hard work. What we want to make sure, so if you're gonna hear this over the next couple of days too, especially as Annie Smith, final presentation, final day, you're gonna be really tired, but she's gonna she's gonna tell us about all that data from national perspective that belongs to NCA, but we also want to make sure it's analyzed back for your use. And one of those things we've never done, but would be phenomenal, is that we own the NSBECs, and these accrediting organizations want to use the rubrics. We don't want to charge, I mean, we're a mission of the church. We don't, it's not about that, but all that data is sitting here. What if an Andy Smith could roll it up and we could have a picture of which of these 70 benchmarks are the biggest concerns right now, or biggest strengths right now, or how can we help each other outside of our narrow vision and our silos? Like, that is a lot of opportunity. And we are very excited about what that could mean. We don't have a roadmap of any of that, but like, there's a lot of possibility there to have these conversations be really driven by the data that you're sitting on also.
So our ask of the accreditation agency is going to be, okay, you're using the product, great, we don't charge, we own the copyright, we don't charge a license fee. I mean, this is a grassroots thing. We like the fact that people adopted this across the country because they found it useful and it kind of percolated up. But you know, the cognias make us much less comfortable in, say, WCEA, which is owned by bishops. So we know that just they're accrediting agencies, but they have very different missions and goals and ownership.
Yeah, we don't have a conference. I mean, and I know that we're not the only state, which is why.
Alabama.
And I mean, we're really looking, I mean, honestly, this is what, because we're going, well, let's go to a Christian accrediting body. I'm like, well, how do we not have a Catholic accrediting body?
Well,
I mean, that was really the question that.
and there's groups like WCEA that are in conversation with other states to step in and fill that well. So of course, the Western bit might be a barrier, but I know I was just meeting with the president of WCEA, and yeah, there's other states in the West that don't have anybody filling that spot. So it's not like a hostile takeover. It just can't. Would you rather be on this ship than on the one you're on?
Yeah,
And if the answer is yes, and so we do want to participate in building those relationships. I mean, when we talk about public policy, we're talking about the gap as well. So not every state should have an organized conference, should have an organized CAPE affiliate for public policy advocate. We know that there's gaps on that, so we want to be a helper for you to try to figure out how we build that infrastructure.
And in the meantime, those conversations keep us at the table. I mean, that's why we're a membership organization. So keep us in that loop. And I know it's not that simple.
Yeah, I feel your pain.
Yeah.
It's because we have such a wide variety here. Like you talked about the one person central office. Yes, I relate. We have Texas, which is large, et cetera. Again, I'm used to Ohio, so I went from Ohio to Alabama to Texas. Alabama has some. Okay, and we have so many varieties of dioceses. You know, Michigan, you get Catholics galore there. Okay, so it's easy to do that. Florida, they all move down, et cetera. But there, you know, Carolinas, Alabama, and things like that. We need assistance, and I'm saying, as part of sympathy for the central office there. And then we have in Texas, we have a wide variety of, you know, you talk about staff, me, myself, and I is my staff. I was joking with her, again, my central office telephones come to my cell phone. I don't have anyone to answer the phones. Okay, and then, you know, that I'm gonna rewrite a curriculum. She wants to know.
Is we want to be a responsive membership association. I'll be talking about this vision for what we do. I mean, you own us, we're your membership association. Basically, we only operate out of two sources of money, is dues and philanthropy. And for us, we really do want to make sure we're using our resources to fill the gaps. You know, part of the assessment that Jill and I have been doing and looking at the activities of NCEA is, okay, are we the only ones that can fill this gap? Or are we the best ones to fill this gap? So, or we're being an A and the others B. We want to be NB students. So I think that as we're looking at the national landscape, I'll talk about this more with governance too. We know that we're the most natural body to pull the census view because everybody's a member. So we can collect that data and fill those gaps. We know that, and even in a school like, in a place like Sacramento, when I talk about governance, even though we have unified governance in my old diocese, we still let schools make most of the decisions about curriculum at the school level. So we know that integration is going to vary depending on how much resource you want to put behind a particular thing.
want to show you a couple of things, just nitty gritty logistics, just so you know your way around this website a bit. You'll know you're in the right spot because the cover looks like your cover, so there you go. You can drill down to the standards along this menu. So if you need a more critical view, you can look at those. The assessment tools, this is what I pulled up for you. So what I stapled together, which isn't together in these documents, are the rubrics and the guidelines. So in your hand is 7.1 rubric and benchmark guideline. But when you go to the website, you're gonna see the rubrics all together. Like here's all the rubrics for standard 1, all the rubrics for standard 2. Okay. And the same will happen if you wanna go even more into the weeds, those benchmark guidelines. So all of the guidelines for standard 1, all the guidelines for standard 2. So that's how they're broken down here. Resources, so in this update of the new writing the revisions will also be an updated glossary. And this is where some of the older tutorials and webinars are sitting there for now. And then this is an incomplete list of how people have used applications. We haven't been updated. This is probably 4 times as long as this list. Because we need to keep asking that question, how are you using them? And then you can see links to dissertations and research. But again, it's growing more rapidly than we've had our sights on. So I'm looking forward to overseeing this and keeping it up to date for everyone on a national scope. But again, we are here to serve you. So if there's a way you want to use this, over the next few days, pick the brains of Dr. Mike Boyle, pick the brain of Dave Faber. There are others, and they'll come up as you work your way through the rooms the next few days. I'm way ahead of time, I think, but I just want to make sure that we are pausing. I think I am. I don't know if I'm watching my time very well, but we're gonna pause here. You can stand, stretch, do what you got to do, and then we're just gonna keep moving. So
We have a slow energy time, but we have a couple of options. One is we take a longer break because you might check email or stretch, and I start the regular time, or we can take a shorter break and I can go into the governance a bit earlier. So
what are you voting for? Long break, short break? Short
break.
break. Moving. Okay.
Ambitious group.
So 5-6 minutes.
Start first, and then we can see each other in about 3 weeks. So glad you said cognitive. We didn't want to name it.
Actually, my background now.
Oh, sure.
Well, no, really.
People love which is good for now. Just like, can you belong to why not? I don't know. So it is.
But yeah, we'll put it as we'll have to switches.
Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. The Diocese of Kansas City. Nice to meet you. I did selling it. Oh, you know what? At the time, I thought I would my name is a pilot student, so I thought I would surround myself forever. I just love it. But my situation now is so great. So I loved it. Nice to meet you.
I was supposed to say, like, be a
Yeah.
It was an event.
There you go.
I was thinking. No, not.
Yeah, 'cause I read it first.
Oh, okay, yeah, I did.
I know, I hope it's a little
I'll work it out.
That's actually good.
And so Greg is here for the.
Yes. Oh, great.
Agrees with every year. Just raising the words.
I don't see why you can't. There's nothing about it. Besides the attachments where you go. Why couldn't you just get during the pandemic, it was like 12 weeks where we were wrapped up. That's when we're- our sex and healthy.
Yes.
No, please stop. It was. You'll see that nothing. About classroom practices, it's about like 6 hours. Upload evidence for every student uploading your uploading student uploading student. Is your evidence of learning good to your?
It's a real small.
Okay, let's talk. On the visit.
Yeah.
But it's
Famous now.
missing that.
It is, that's what I told my mom
That
that.
drives the scores, and so that's what we have done. It's like,
What's
but
it look like? I don't know.
it's about, did you produce the right evidence to show us? We don't initially get school, but. So I use this point. Yeah. I hear you. Yes, I hear. So now.
I'm so glad you made it. The analysis of why accreditation is the PLC.
Yeah.
Doing this as professional learning community,
Yeah.
talking about the same thing at the same time, looking at the data as a whole. Like.
So similar, we don't have it. It's not so
So glad.
So I think that same, that same like. I don't know if that's.
Did I mention the coffee's really strong? Okay. So we'll look forward to hearing your feedback on your model network, because we'll be. I look forward to answers to that. No. I actually killed some trees for this presentation too. There was just one part of it where we were chatting at it, so like every good teacher, I've got a handle. Pass those down.
Oh, thank you.
Lost my colors. Yeah, so we had quite the adventure with tech. We got an iPad and Zoom. We're doing 2 Zoom feeds plus another system called Symphony and getting feedback. And it was, but I was the one who was having that. I even brought it back up. So all of this is getting memorialized. So. Okay, we are. All right, well, we're moving along rather nicely here. So, want to talk a bit about governance. Now, we have the governance standards in the NESBECs, but I wasn't going to be doing it quite the same format as my colleagues walking through the standards. We can come back to them at the end. But really, I just wanted to talk more about the notion of governance from your perspective as a systems leader, because we know the dioceses are doing a lot of different things with governance right now, or not, and I think that makes a big difference for your job. So the first part of this conversation is going to be talking about the notion of Catholic school governance conceptually. Then we're going to talk about, we'll have a chance to share out what everybody's doing in their respective diocese or system, and then we'll have a conversation around best practices, research, what the association is trying to do to support you, and what we do next. So a little bit about myself and my background. So I was a teacher for a while. I went into business, and when I had a family company, and when I went into working for the family company and left working for the brothers recycled me onto their school board in Sacramento, California, and which was actually very providential for my current gig, because the brothers had invested in the 1980s and 90s into updating their governance. So just a note on the De La Salle brothers, they had a Napa winery, they sold for $300 million. They invested the money really prudently in supporting in particular formation of lay boards that would oversee each of their high schools. They knew they didn't have the vocations for the brothers to continue managing everything. And so they figured, well, we'll just form lay partners and we'll hand off to them. And so in Sacramento, the brothers have, well, it's the oldest school in town. The Sisters of Mercy had a huge footprint in Sacramento. And this was always something that struck me as pertinent to why governance matters. The sisters did not invest in governance. They did not invest in the formation of lay partners. And they've essentially folded. So they went from having multiple works, hospitals, a huge footprint, provincialate, and a lot of sisters in Sacramento, to having a handful of retired sisters in Sacramento, half of one ministry, with no sisters working there, and the province house now being in Omaha because they didn't have the resources to support having the province house in Sacramento. The brothers have more apostolates in that district than they had 30 years ago when they made the commitment to going to governance. So more kids, more schools, more success, and I would argue very strong continuity of mission, because they did invest in making sure that the lay partners like us were prepared to continue to work with schools. And so this was really instructive for me when I took my job as superintendent or executive director of schools in Sacramento. Bishop was looking for a businessman who had teaching experience or had religious formation that understood board governance, because he had decided to go to a unified board model in Sacramento. And so when I took over, the model had failed at implementation, and I'll talk about that. It stalled out with only 14 schools being under these unified school boards he had created. And so when I left, 34 of our 36 elementary schools had come under the boards, with even the Jesuit school in line to come under. And then the last to fall once Monsignor, who is the current operating school, retires in a couple of years. So I did live this experience of going from a traditional parochial pastor supervised model to unified governance. And I had that experience with the brothers in mind the whole time as I was working. So finally, a note on my ambitions for WCEA, and I'll say these up front because I'll return to them. We used to have a governance department within the association that did things like data and research and training and publications, that we'll need to renew that. So we'll talk at the end about my thoughts on that, and hopefully you can give me some feedback on what would be useful for you. Okay, so I thought a lot about what the actual Catholic school governance model is as I tried to figure out how to sell pastors on the idea of giving up direct supervision of a principal. And in my mind, I read a really instructive book called Lost Classroom, Lost Community, about what happens in communities when a Catholic school goes out of business. Really interesting book, strongly recommend. And so the Catholic school model in my mind was not that pastor hires a principal and supervises him. What the model was this, is that bishop and pastor would invite a religious order into a diocese to operate a school. The pastor would build a school building or maintain a school building on his parish, but the mission was entrusted to the order. The order brought the educational training and support, they brought the formation and mission, the visitation and supervision. So you ended up with the principal and teachers who are accountable to the pastor, accountable to the order, generally from the order, and everybody was focused on not just education and catechesis, but also sacramental and faith life for those kids. So the religious orders brought a lot of the structure to schools through the way that they're set up. Most religious orders have some version of a document called conduct. The conduct is the way that they teach. Every religious order must have a rule. That's their rule book for how they treat each other and have a community around a particular mission. They have community life, and so they have collaboration, articulation, mobility, up and down, the value or the hierarchy as well as geographically. You have visitation, so they have trained, essentially associate superintendents in the field, making sure that the schools are performing well and keeping with mission. You have a charism, which has a clear identity, it gives you that sense of purpose that you as the teacher are modeling for your students, you as the leader are modeling for your sisters and brothers that are teaching in classrooms. Most importantly, you have this mutual accountability. So you have all of these grown-ups that are holding each other accountable for the salvation and education of that kid, that one kid in the desk, in a very particular way. And so it was this really dynamic environment where you had all these grown-ups that had a lot of training, they had their lanes, and they had to collaborate for the good of the kids. So really for me, that network approach is part of the secret sauce of Catholic schools. Everybody's got a really highly developed sense of purpose around their job, and it's all moving in the same direction on behalf of that kid they're teaching. What happened? Starting in the 1960s, the number of vocations started declining in absolute numbers. And so the Catholic school model never presumed that pastor was going to be supervising a principal, but that supervision defaulted to pastor when the order withdrew from the school with no one left to replace them. So to whom do you entrust the mission? Who's providing the educational training and support? Who's providing the formation to mission? It defaulted to a pastor, which in some cases you had a pastor who maybe had a school's background himself, or maybe he had a talent, but it certainly wasn't something that he was formed toward in seminary. In other words, this wasn't part of his day job when he signed up for being a priest. And so, as with every profession where you're depending on the talents or experience of the individual, but you don't have infrastructure, what happened with results? They vary. Sometimes you had great pastors that could really supervise well, other times you had something else. So, and the other thing that you really lost was that intentional community, right? So the pastor views the teachers as a member of his parish community, and he sees everything through that parish lens. As he should, that's appropriate. But traditionally, teachers had this other community life that, again, was formation to mission around a particular charism, and they collaborated around that. So they weren't just active at the parish, they were also in community for a particular educational mission at the same time. So what does this mean for you as superintendent, and why your superintendent's office is so small traditionally? Superintendent didn't have as much to do 50 years ago. 100 years ago, most dioceses didn't even have a superintendent because you had the religious orders filling a lot of that role. So what really opened my eyes to why we have such relatively small offices compared to public districts was a conversation with a really dynamic superintendent in Oakland, California, named Sister Barbara Gray, retired about the same time I was starting as superintendent. As a young sister in the Oakland diocese, she said there were about 60 schools with 11 orders operating, and each of those orders had 2 visitatrices who were out in the field, essentially filling the role of an associate superintendent for the order. They were supervising and holding accountable and supporting. They were out doing. And so there was only one superintendent who was the figurehead, who was the representative of the bishop, who was religious, and collaborated with those order superiors and visitors. But his job, when most superintendents are priests, and sometimes the religious assistant was her job, was to coordinate, but not to supervise. Spoke for the system when necessary, fought fires when they had to, helped bishop with accountability. That changed. The orders withdrew, the associates went away. And so this raises the question of, to whom does that work pass? Again, very often it defaulted to us running these little skeleton crew offices that were never intended to operate at that level. I was very blessed in Sacramento to have a bishop who had chosen to put resources behind schools as part of his strategic plan. And so he let us come in and create this job position called a regional director. And so we put field visitors back into the school's office. We had approximately 1 person for every 10 elementary schools that were filling that same role. So they were the visitor, the visitatrix in the field supporting. And so, in Sacramento, we had a game section position. It cost money. You had to hire 4 new people with the school's office. But what it really looked like from the big picture was bishop and pastor, instead of entrusting the mission to a religious order, created school corporate boards. So bishop divided the Sacramento diocese into 3 districts. And I reported, I was superintendent of 3 different school districts, the way it was set up. So you had a corporate board filling that same spot that Mother Superior did. And the board then delegated the mission of Operation Schools to us, the Catholic School Department. So it was one way to try to put that leg of the stool back in place. Who's providing the form training, support, and formation to mission and direct supervision? It was the bishop's own school department. This actually was what let me sell the pastors on the idea of giving them some control of their schools. So, Father, we're still accountable to you. You still supervise the school boards. You can nominate people to the boards. And I also made sure that the pastors were still involved in the supervision of the principal as a religious leader. So Father always wrote the evaluation of the principal in Sacramento as a religious leader. And so, okay, Father, you're trained for that. And then we'll have lay partners who perform to all the other stuff, communications, instructional leadership, administrative leadership. They'll work with you in evaluating that piece. So that's how we skin the cat. For most of the pastors, it was intuitive when I gave them this presentation. Okay, makes sense, you're right. It came across a lot better than what they heard from my predecessor, which was, you're terrible at your job, so we're taking it away from you. And so, no, Father, it's never the intent that you be the sole supervisor or principal. That's not the way it worked when you went to program schools. So that's one way we skin the cat in Sacramento. But I know that it looks different everywhere. So something right now, we could just do the roundtable conversation, maybe one by one, just a quick synopsis of what's been done with governance in your diocese. I'm very curious to hear from you directly. How are things set up? Is it a traditional model? Do you have some integration? And partly as food for thought on that copy in front of you, one of our donors came up with this matrix to show, okay, how are we integrated? He did it in quadrants. I think of it as a sliding scale of a 1 to 5. So for me, Sacramento would have been a 4 out of 5 on terms of integration. We operated kind of like a district, except each school maintained its own books. You go to the Archdiocese of New York, they create these corporations where they even commingle revenue. Right, so they're really running like a school district. Sacramento was one step short of that. So just wanted to hear what your experience is so far in your diocese and how things are. Is it more traditional or are you experimenting? So Nikki, would you like that?
I would say that we are very mixed. We have diocesan schools, regional schools, and parish schools. And right now, the focus of the diocese is to move all of our schools under diocesan leadership and make the pastors more of the pastoral care. And a lot of that comes from feedback from our pastors that they either don't know the inner workings of how to run a school, or they're so busy that they don't have time to be involved in the governance of the school.
Colorado Springs is parochial. We have 2 independent high schools. Tried to move priests towards a regionalization model a couple of years ago, the former superintendent, and they shut it down. They would like the money, but they don't want to give up control.
For our diocese, the majority of our schools are parochial. We have some diocesan high schools. We have 3 private sisters schools still sponsored by the sisters, and then we have a structure of an inner city school system that's sponsored by multiple parishes. We currently, one of the things, I guess we just had our new bishop was installed 3 weeks ago, so we have a new bishop, so we were looking to learn his vision too. We do not currently have a diocesan board and have not had for over 12 years, so that's something.
We have 2 high schools that are run by religious orders. We have the 9 elementary and 1 high school that after the scandals, they incorporated everything. So each school has their own corporate board. And then we have a diocesan board because they wanted to do that. But because the superintendent or the diocesan board has no jurisdiction over any of them, because all of them have corporate boards.
And we'll get to that.
All of our K-8 buildings are parochial model with the pastor in charge. We have 3 high schools that have board leadership, and then we have 3 independent private high schools that do that. Completely.
Understood.
We have the 2 high schools, both are diocesan, 18 elementary schools, 5 are parish, 13 are diocesan. Every school has its own advisory board, none of them are governing. I have a diocesan advisory board. We cover 5 different counties, so I have representation from each county on my board representing the schools that they're in. They all manage their own finances, but budgets for all, including the parish schools, are approved by my office, and I have access for oversight to all of their accounting.
Excellent. Hold that back, because we're going to talk about that as a secret weapon in the arsenal for all of us.
Our schools are all separately incorporated as well. Our archdiocesan schools, we have 41 elementary and 3 high schools. We also have a few order schools and a couple of private schools. We do have one of our archdiocesan school with the Nativity Miguel model that has a board. But our Department of Catholic Schools really is just an advisory. So we try not to tell them that, but when it comes right down to it, they don't have to do anything themselves.
I mean, I believe you answered it.
And Austin has a mix. We have diocesan, parish, and independent schools. Other than the 3 independent schools, all the other schools have advisory boards. We do have a diocesan school advisory board that's made up of pastors and just community members. We are trying to move towards a diocesan model. We just started meeting with school pastors. And there's just so much stress, just like you mentioned. I'm looking at this going all across the campus. So I think the superintendent is really wanting to move in that direction.
Anytime we can help, by the way, we'll talk about that.
In Lafayette, Indiana, the diocese, there's only 2 high schools, they're both diocesan high schools. Lafayette does not include the Indianapolis, but there's one high school that's kind of like suburbs of Indy. And then I'm president of the group of Catholic schools that are within Lafayette, which is considered a big city. The diocese, 10,000 square miles. A lot of it's rural. And it's been an interesting, I mean, I've only been in the role for 2.5 months, but it's been an interesting dynamic with the superintendent's office and the board. Our board currently is in charge of, I think I would consider, I guess, a central collegial. And we're trying, I think the superintendent, the bishop's trying to move to a central executive. And there's been some dynamics there, but right now, we do everything for the schools. We help run enrollment, we do all the fundraising, we do. The pastors, I oversee the principals. The pastors have a role certainly, but it's mostly a faith formation aspect, the religious aspect of the schools. And right now it's been, I think it's worked well personally. And a lot of it came out through, I think back in the early 90s, the schools were close to closing. So they kind of had basically the lay people got up and took control and provided finances, and then ultimately this came out of it. And not that we don't have things to work on, but that seems pretty working pretty well.
So we have 3 independent high schools, one owned by the Jesuits, Cristo Rey, and then we have 2 privately owned independent schools. Very weird. And then the rest of our elementary schools and our preschools are parochial. So our office, our kind of accountability structure really resides in the accreditation piece.
Mhm.
And that's how we kind of gain partnership or influence over what happens in the schools.
Yeah, it was funny. That was very much my experience when I first started as superintendent. A few dioceses were just getting going, but the accreditation piece was very important to many of my superintendent colleagues because of that. So of course, as we mess with models, that can change, but it's definitely a very important area.
We have one parochial school, the other schools are diocesan schools. Each school has their own advisory school board. We do have a diocesan school board now. Bishop is new, I'm new, we're trying to figure out what is. Just kind of had a meeting where we just kind of sat around and kind of talked a little bit, but kind of like, we don't really know. So we're just looking at, possibly having them function as more of a council on specific projects rather than to have an actual diocesan school board. Because right now, there's sort of like a conduit between diocese and parents with complaints. And that's not really what we need. I don't really need, word on the street or, I don't really need that. And so I've been trying to see what other superintendents are doing in their diocese. And so this session was of particular interest to me as we move forward and looking at governance. But I supervise principals at all of the schools that are, except for the parochial school, I work on a consultative basis with that.
Okay, perfect. And well, since we have a little bit of extra time, maybe I'll spend a little bit of time on a model that we're working on for support of those parochial models where you still want to separate the parents from the supervision piece, because that seems to be where it gets.
One thing that, because our bishop was new for 2 years, but one of the things that his predecessor did, which is kind of unique, is he assigned responsibility for the administrative handbook, adherence of all policies, to my office for both parish and diocesan. So if it's in the administrative handbook, then my office has the role of going to parish schools as well and saying compliant, not compliant, training, clarification, and working with the pastor. So there's another link there. And then obviously they don't report into me, but through the relationship development, they've all known me for like 15 years. They work really well, but if they don't, then I go to Vicar General and he goes to them and says, yes, you have to follow policy. So because of that structure and them being told that, yes, you have to follow policies, they do. And then how we use our advisory board is to review those policies for taking feedback back to on policies that may need revision. So that's their role, is review of policy, and it keeps them out of the parent part. And I know every month, this is the policy we're reviewing on a regular basis for what needs to be updated so we're current. And then they have a role.
So one question I think that to distill this, there's the question for you as a superintendent, to whom do you report? And obviously, ultimately, it's going to be Bishop, working in a diocesan office. But these are more notes for yourselves, and we can come back to this if we're going to get into the problem solving conversation. But really, to whom do you report? I reported to boards, and it was complicated because it was the superintendent of 3 districts, but ultimately being supervised by bishops. So I know that these things can be kind of messy. Who's your boss? Well, it depends on where I am. Each of those boards have their own culture, by the way. We can talk about that too. The big one, to whom do your principals report? And I think that this is even the bigger question for us as people in diocesan offices. To whom do the principals ultimately report, and how do you manage that accountability? For which outcomes are you accountable, and for which outcomes is someone else accountable? And I think that this is the accountability piece is really at the core of all of this. Governance is just a means to an end, the ends being excellent schools that serve students well. And so accountability for that outcome really is the essence of the governance question. Is father accountable? Is the principal accountable? Or are you accountable? Who should be accountable? And not a minor question, but to your point, Joan, I want you to just really note this one as your secret weapon as a superintendent is how integrated are your finances? There's 2 aspects of governance that we're going to talk about throughout the conversation. And one is the school board question. Lots of talk about boards or networks, but the other one is the finance question. So Bishop is going to be able to legislate in 2 ways within his diocese. He has general policy that he can set. Might have to have a synod and other things to really change how the priest can supervise the school. But he also has financial legislation. And so every bishop is accountable to the diocesan finance council. That really is this tool that every single diocese in the country has in place that holds bishop financially accountable for how he operates the books. And so as you're thinking about governance, as you step into your role, keep that finance piece in mind. A lot of the things that we got done with integration in Sacramento weren't just these boards and us being the bosses of the principals, quote unquote, but it was also that financial piece. So we were able to get one cloud-based system, one standard chart of accounts, a shared services team managing the finances and accountability through the financial piece, not just through having a visitor out in the field directing principals to do things. So I want to talk a little bit about the resources we offer you as you're coming into this. First of all, going to the NESBECs, Jill shared with you a sample of the self-assessment. We have that online, which is completely free. You can go on the website for the NESBECs, and we have an entire set of standards that do deal with governance. So I would just encourage you, and I'm not going to read it aloud to you, but I would encourage you to get familiar with this document. There are self-assessments on there. And so I think for you coming into the role, it would be really helpful for you to do the self-assessment. I actually did this back in the pre-internet paper days when I started my job using this document. It works. It really does let you know where you're at on each of the standards. You can self-evaluate. It'll take you a couple of hours to do, but I think it's got a really useful taxonomy of what's going on with governance. So do the self-assessment online. The second resource I wanted to point you to is we have a book called Catholic School Governance Handbook for a New Era. And this one is also indexed to the NESBEC. So this is a little bit more detailed. I'd say good is doing the online assessment, better is doing the school questionnaire. It's going to take a lot more time. But the goal of this book was for really to help school leaders and network leaders understand what their boards are doing and not doing. So we've got handy little checklists and assessment rubrics and things in this one as well. So it's complementary to our NESBEC stuff. So just to pitch for this. Now, we do know that we need to update our governance series. So I am hoping to get the funding in the next year to hire a leader that is going to be focused on school governance nationally. So some of my ambitions have to do with this new position. I'll talk about that on the next slide. But we can help you with certain aspects as well beyond our publications. If you wanted to have those specific questions, I'll talk about a couple of things at the end since I think we have a little bit more time. So, I've done board formation at the high school level around the model called policy governance, and I've done these boards for elementary schools. And so we have a lot of expertise within the network that either perhaps we can help, or if you really need to do board formation, there are consultants and other experts out there that could come in and actually do the infrastructure work for you. So we can help connect you. There's a document that I'll make sure I email to each of you that was written by a group called Faber. Anybody ever heard of? So Faber is going to come up a lot at these NCEA meetings. This is a network of philanthropists that support the church and in particular schools. And so they've funded some really important studies over the last 7 or 8 years, and some of them are in the area of governance. They also did one about parent market perceptions. We were just talking about this, Josh. So Faber has done some really high impact, high value studies about what makes a difference in Catholic schools. One area of research is governance. Now, they don't have a census of every diocese and what's happening everywhere. I want us to help get to that as the NCEA, as an objective of mine. But Faber has a very, very, very interesting study that I'm going to email to you that I copied this chart out of. And so as you can read what a lot of your colleagues are doing across the country with the question of governance. Higher education, so some of our higher ed partners offer free training in the area of governance and school boards. Loyola Marymount University out of Los Angeles is going to be doing a governance series. Lauren Casella, who is the head of the Catholic Ed group, is going to be here. And so if you have questions around governance training and what's happening with LMU, we can connect you to Lauren. Notre Dame has a lot of training. They tend to push one more particular model. In other words, they've got a playbook that they're selling, but if it works for you, great. And they've done a lot of research around that one particular playbook. And then again, our corporate partners. We have corporate partners that are very interested in the area of school governance as well. So, really what we want to do is not just track innovation and models, but really understand what's working. And so, again, my goal for the NCEA is to find funding for that new position so we can take what Faber and others have done with researching governance models and complete the survey. So it's a census. We know what's happening in all 176 dioceses with schools. That's why there is a census, by the way. It takes a lot of time to complete the census of governance for 176 dioceses. But really understand what's happening and what's not. I'll pick on a diocese in California, San Jose, made a big splash with a network model called the Drexel schools. And you can read about Drexel, but that doesn't really tell you the whole picture of San Jose. San Jose has 27 schools in one county, like 10 of them or 12 of them in this Drexel model, but what's happening big picture with everybody else, and what are the outcomes for the diocese as a whole? That's the questions that we want to help answer. But going through just ideas or food for thought for you in terms of networking with your fellow superintendents, and if you look at that taxonomy or that little chart we gave you, so some orders have gone through really structured governance model, like the Del brothers use a model called policy governance, and all their schools are on the same model, and so they've got a lot of structure for board training. Some dioceses operate as school districts. The Archdiocese of New York has done the most to actually bring their schools into regional corporations that operate like a district. Cardinal Dolan had to spend $70 million to buy out the receivables of his schools to get there. So that's probably not going to happen everywhere. But Michael Capitelli is a gentleman from Archdiocese of New York who's going to be at this session, or at this convocation rather. So if you're curious about what's happening in New York, one of their folks will be here. Just a person to tap on the shoulder over cocktails. Sacramento was one of the dioceses went to a unified model for all the elementary schools. Other dioceses have gone to networks, so it's great to have you in the room because I think of San Jose or Oakland or what you're doing, you'll have these clusters of schools that are grouped into corporations that are operating. So beyond all that, we also want to support in training for better governance within that traditional model. Right, so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. If you're a superintendent in a place where a pastor is still the boss, and that's not going to change, we don't want to presume that everybody's going to be going to these radically different models. we want to make sure we can also help you succeed where you're at. So we have books and publications on that. We're looking to update as part of this investment in governance. My own thoughts on this, just really briefly. In Sacramento, we had what used to be called the school boards at the parish schools transform into a new organization, new body called the Catholic School Advisory Council, Catholic School Advisory Committees. And we gave them jobs to do in 5 different areas where we really knew the principal needed support. Advancement, enrollment management, volunteer coordination, mission effectiveness, and what was the 5th, Crystal? Missing one. I'll send you the document. Anyway, so 5 committees, but none of them had to do with things like setting the budget or supervising teachers or setting pay for staff. Really icky stuff for me when I came about how in the world is a parent telling the principal what the teacher is going to earn. Conflicts of interest are endemic with your little local school boards. What I've been discussing with one of our dioceses is taking that playbook and then having separating roles, giving parents jobs to do in the areas where they can really help the principal. The pastor is still the supervisor of the principal. The pastor doesn't really have the chops to do it. Can't get around that. Long story short, giving pastor and some sort of executive committee or group of people who are only focused on that, helping him with that supervisory piece, is probably going to be really important to avoid a lot of those other conflicts of interest. And my biggest dysfunction in my mind is that we have parents, kids in the classroom, telling pastor whether or not they think the principal is doing a good job. And so that's just icky all the way around for a lot of reasons. I see lots of nodding heads, the dysfunction. So one piece of advice, if I could give any one piece of advice, would be that work with the bishop to make sure that you have your parent committee, give them jobs to do where they can be really helpful and engaged. But the group that actually helps father supervise the principal has to be more independent, and that should really be their only function. The parents running the bake sale should also be evaluating. They're not informed to do that. So I think that, yeah.
And you would suggest that the members outside of the Catholic schools office?
So perhaps it could be somebody from the Catholic schools office helping father supervise. He'd be very well advised to have the superintendent or associate superintendent be involved in that supervisory piece. But again, maybe it could be someone from his finance council or someone from the field of education, but there's people that actually have some qualifications to help them evaluate whether or not the principal is doing an adequate job. Because I have one dysfunction to fix, it's parents supervising principals is just bad for a lot of reasons. So we know that even within the traditional model, there can be improvement. Some things that aren't going to change with any governance model in the church, in my observation. One is that dynamic push and pull. I mean, ownership is distributed within the Catholic Church. Will Rogers had that joke that I don't belong to an organized political party and I'm a Democrat. And I think, Chris, we don't belong to an organized faith. We are a grassroots, subsidiarity-based organization. Power is distributed by Catholic law to the lowest level, practically. Doesn't mean that it should always be devolved to the lowest level. Sometimes that's not best, but wherever it's best to be at the local level, it is at the local level. No matter how you operate within the church, you're really more about power than authority as a superintendent. So I went to diplomacy school, and one of the lines there was that power is the ability to influence an outcome, and authority is the ability to direct a behavior. As a superintendent, even with me having been an executive director, I was still more focused on influencing outcomes than directing behaviors, because try to tell a priest what to do. You have to figure out how to influence the outcome. And so we're always going to have distributed ownership. You're always going to have the possibility, even if positionally a priest doesn't have the right to tell you no, they'll tell you no, and then you're in the power struggle. So financial integration is a place where you could probably start a conversation with your bishop if you don't have it. And because the finance council will support you. Should every school be on a common chart of accounts? Should the accounting be in the cloud rather than on one bookkeeper's computer where nobody can access it? Does anybody like the checkbook accounting at the central office? No, right? So don't underestimate what a great ally the diocesan finance council is going to be for you and bishop in trying to figure out how to help at least with that piece of accounting. Competing cultures. A lot of these models do create different cultures within your system or within the diocese. One of the things that we learned, so as we started creating a team of advancement directors, Crystal and I are going to be doing a lightning round on that on Tuesday, but when you start delegating things to different people in different ways, it's kind of like with high schools on their own president principal. The culture of the president's office is a little bit different from the culture of the principal's office. Or the culture of the schools within a network are going to be different than the culture of the parochial schools. So being mindful of those competing cultures and the kind of conflict it creates is also going to be a big part of your job when you're stepping into these models. Connection of models to outcomes, I think, is the one most important thing to not lose sight of. So one model of governance called policy governance creates a thing called ends policies. And what those are is you write down what the outcomes are that you want for the institution. And then everything is beholden to moving toward those ends. So it's not an end, it's a means. And the thing that you can't ever lose sight of is the ends. And so when I interviewed for my current gig, I sat down and I wrote the ends policies, what I thought they might be for this organization, even though our governance isn't framed that way. When I did my diocesan job, I did the same thing. What are the ends? What are the top 4 things? What's the global end we're really seeking to achieve with the schools? And then what are those 3 or 4 big objectives? Not a strategic plan, but the ends. Like, what are the actual outcomes for the schools that you supervise? What do you want? Because again, that gets into the outcome piece and not just the authority piece. Finally, any governance model is only going to be as good as the leadership pipeline that you've got. And so you can have the best structure in the world, but if you don't have a bench of principles with which to fill it, you're going to struggle. Or you can have a really weak governance model, but a deep bench of potential principles that you could nudge toward these jobs. And you're probably going to have success. And so as you look at the standards, you'll see a lot of standards in there that have to do with leadership formation and development. Pay attention to those benchmarks. And if there's any way we can help you, we're happy to talk about it. We have a leadership academy in Sacramento. I know, Jill, you've been very deeply involved with leadership formation and academies. Building that bench is something that you can make a priority for yourself as a superintendent, independent of any governance model you may be in. And that was always the biggest challenge for us. We figure that a principal's lifespan is going to be around 6 years. That means every year you're hiring 10-15% new principals for us in Sacramento. Every year I have to come up with 5 new great leaders for our 36 schools and make sure that they were on that to ready to step in. And so that's going to be the scramble to make sure you're always renewing that bench is going to be a huge aspect of your job that regardless of what's happening in governance, you're going to have. Okay, so again, the NCEA is looking to do more with the area of governance. We're hopefully going to find the funding to have a governance leader within the organization. I'm not promising, but I hope I can deliver on that ambition because I think it'd be good for all of us. Again, it's going to take a person to track what's happening in 176 different dioceses. So my hope is that if we can find the resources for that, they can be your partner in answering the phone. Okay, what's happening? Who's doing things the way I'm doing, or my bishop's got the following question. Really, I want this person to be advisory to you and your bishops. It's 176 bishops, 176 superintendents' offices, looking to find out what's happening elsewhere, and most importantly, what's working. How do we measure the outcomes? How do we get the word out? I also hope that this person can lead in renewing our cycle of publications. We know that some of our books they're good, but they're 20 years old, and so we're due to re-up governance publications as well. So I think that the final spiritual call that we have as systems leaders in filling the void left by the orders when they withdrew from schools is that we need 3rd order level identity and consistency as lay partners. So within the religious world, the 3rd order is a lay group associated with the religious order. So you'll have Dominican friars, you'll have Dominican brothers, then you'll have lay Dominicans. So third tier. They're lay partners that make promises. They don't take vows, but they make promises to operate within that particular charism. And so our slogan within the school's office, unofficial slogan, was "We're Mother Superior." In other words, I knew that for us to really serve bishop filling that leg of the stool, the one that was left by the orders when they vacated, was to operate with order level identity and consistency as best we could. So I just did the mental exercise. We're Bishop's lay partner, third order, carrying out his mission, and really tried to assign a real spirituality and charisma to that. So we did things like make promises. So I sat down with the bishops, and we came up with 5 promises that each of our principals made. We had a commissioning mass, and then everybody got framed on their desk, and they knew that they were operating with that level of faith identity. My hope was always that when you walk into, for example, a Jesuit classroom or a Dominican classroom, you know exactly where you are. And really the goal I had, or the outcome I had in mind, one of them for governance, was to have that order level consistency from school to school and classroom to classroom. Could you walk into a classroom anywhere in the Diocese of Sacramento and know where you were? And so my hope is that as we bring in all of these new friends and retain them, that because we've had a lot of families come and go during COVID, but a lot of our dioceses are up, a lot of those families didn't have a connection to Catholic school, that we're going to be able to maintain that consistency of community that is the reason that they came, and that they, perhaps not the reason they came, but definitely the reason they're staying with us. So again, my governance, make sure that we're continuing to deliver authentically as Catholic schools. Finally, I think that what does sustainability mean as a Catholic school? We're only getting money from 5 buckets. We're getting it from parents, we're getting it from the parish, we're getting it from endowments, we're getting it from other non-related philanthropists, and we're getting it from the diocese itself. So all the money came from one of those 5 buckets when we did the budgets, and you need all 5. So the hope is that by being mindful that governance is about those networks of community, being dedicated to the salvation education of those individual kids, that you can really keep all taps open at the same time. That's how we make sure we've got the funds we need to operate successful schools. So that's my primer on governance. I know I had a lot of questions and places we could go with this, and we're well on schedule. So I just opened it to the floor. I didn't go over the NSBACs or rubrics, but I did talk about models, and some of you had questions. So I wanted to make sure I returned to those.
Well, I'm thinking about my situation. I think sort of short of talking to other superintendents and just looking at what everyone is doing currently in their day. Where do you think we should start, Bishop and I, in terms of the work of the Archdiocese School Board?
I'm always happy to talk to you and Bishop about that one-on-one, and I know that there's other folks that could help with that conversation too. The document I'll send out, or make sure it's emailed to you, the Fatica study, it does case studies, I think, from around 20 different places. And so it'll just give you an idea of how people are operating and how it works. I think a lot of it with Bishop is, how does he feel about his relationship with pastors? How much is he feeling empowered to change that? If he could only make a couple of big changes, what would they be? Is he more worried about the finances, or more worried about the leadership? Worried about principal retention and burnout? So, you're not going to be able to change everything all at once on all fronts. And so I think really getting a sense of, okay, what are our biggest risks? For us in Sacramento, when we looked at areas where we needed to integrate, we said, okay, well, our books are a mess. We have no idea how we're still in business because we don't actually know who's making or losing money. We're not organized in marketing. We're not, we're vulnerable in transitions. We're having a lot of turnovers, and we didn't have a system for making sure the transitions went well. So we had schools closed because of bad transitions. And so a lot of the model was just backward mapping to the areas where we were vulnerable. You also know what you want to leave alone. And so Jill mentioned the curriculum piece, and when you've got a small superintendent's office, curriculum wasn't a big problem for us. Actually, the quality of instruction wasn't a big issue in the Diocese of Sacramento. So we really didn't mess with that part too much. Okay, we'll encourage the schools to collaborate as groups to select a curriculum so they do common training, for example. But that wasn't the first problem that we tackled. I was way more worried about it. Now we are taking on assessment. We're going to standards reference assessment in Sacramento, and so that was a big project. But again, we still aren't dictating a curriculum to any one school. We just decided to leave some things be. So I think a real clear-eyed assessment of where are we most vulnerable and how do we make sure we manage around that as a good place to start.
So I have a bishop also, he started June 29th, I started July 1st. So, I've been in the diocese, but not at that level. So trying to prioritize, right? And so building those relationships with the priest and then helping the priests understand their role in the Catholic schools is there, so they're not getting stuck in the minutia. Is there any resource, any place you would direct if I'm gonna, I have a priest who wants more training from me tonight, so.
Yes, okay, so there are different resources. I think a lot of it, and I'd be happy to talk to you and Bishop about this. Some of the Notre Dame offers training for pastors at schools. They've got some really good programs. I went to a conference in West Palm Beach in July with training for pastors for schools.
He's gone to a week-long training.
USCCB has, we have resources, you know, but I think that the important part is, you know, what outcome does Bishop want? Because I went to one training where it was basically encouraging the pastors to maintain and control the schools and by golly, just try harder and learn more. And they, in other words, it was not coming from a place where the model itself, the pastor being the boss, should be questioned, right? So it was really affirmational for the 30 priests that went through that training, but it's not the one you'd want to send a priest to if Bishop is looking to maybe get father a different way. And, yeah, so I'd be happy to have a conversation, but Notre Dame and then the one in West Palm Beach, were the two I've attended, I could certainly look up some other resources as well.
You don't have any surveys that are like school board self-assessment?
We do. So your board could use this rubric or the NSBEX to do a self-assessment. So if you wanted to, I'll put that back over on the shelf and we'll have it here. And
I'm gonna join in. So we do. So in our data system, we have assessments for boards, for parents, for school leaders, for your think about when you survey your high schoolers, your middle and high schoolers, like all of those sets we have for you to use. And so,
And how do we get to those?
so when you meet Annie in a couple of days, Annie said she'll have those details for you, because then she can set up a survey for you. She can tweak certain questions, add in questions for you. She can do all that, and then as it's delivered back to you, she can do that analysis if you want quantitative or qualitative analysis based on what kind of survey you have.
So this is part of like the number.
So it depends on what it is, right? It depends on what it is. She can
You do
give
all the
you a
analysis
copy.
too, huh?
So it depends on what it is, right? So if you just want those sets of questions, that's no
Sure.
problem. If you want to see how your answers compare to everyone else in the country, then we'll want to put it in our system that way. So that's,
But you can
Those are
support
great.
us in all.
so we've been doing that a lot,
Yeah,
like
okay, great.
in the last 2 years or so, as Annie's come on in the last year, we've gotten much better at systemizing those questions, realizing how to tweak them
Yeah.
according to the NSBEX. So then we can roll some data and say, well, is that how the people at other diocese answered that? Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and that's part of the goal of this governance position. So we added Annie, and very pleased to be supported by funders in having done that. And then we've got a second data analyst within the organization. And then if we add this governance leader, we know that we could really do a lot of damage in having a really solid data set. So any funders that would like to help participate in that. No, but seriously, the response was very positive. So I'm hoping in the next few months we'll have a sense of where we're at.
Jill, about, with respect to those surveys, do you know if they align to WCEA or WCEA surveys have aligned to those?
I have yet to have that conversation with
Right.
Greg on that level, so I don't know what their current surveys look like.
Okay.
But
I'll
we're open
look
to
at
having that align more closely. So there have been dioceses using our surveys in support of their accreditation process. I just don't know where on the map those have been, but Annie Smith will have your answer.
And we're going to hear back from Greg too, because WCEA just did the first pilot for their NSBEX integrated protocol at Little Flower, and so,
Yeah, there's actually several schools. I know the Diocese of Spokane has 6 or 7 of their elementary schools using the NASDAQs for their full visits.
Right, and so I have a feeling that some of them have been using the surveys, and I'm just curious. We'll make sure we have that conversation before we leave. Yeah.
Does this instrument deal with the system as well, like such things as attendance, number of meetings, committees, those type of things? Or, because that's actually what I'm looking for more at this point in time, because I can't get them to meet, so the idea is to inspect what you expect. And so I've looked at things like board source and things like that, but does this actually cover those basic rudiments?
yeah, we've got 3 different major board publications, and one of them does go over that. So it's the, forgetting them, they've got very similar titles. Regina Haney wrote a book called, let me look up the title. There's one where she does go into the mechanics of it. That's one of the ones that it's still a solid book. It probably needs an updating, so we're going to be looking at that in the next year, but we do have, let me get the exact title for you.
Are you looking for which committee, like which structures of committees to consider, or are you looking for, so I guess tell us.
I'm looking for an instrument to do, again, I kind of know what they need to do, and I'm short of writing it. And then I've looked at board source, which, you know, is very good, but I can't afford to join. Okay, because it's $3 just $3,000 just to join. Okay, and to look at some of their materials, because, you know, they have a lot that's actually for free. But to be able to, you know, more along those lines, again, because the idea is that, you know, if you educate them, they will change. You know, maybe that would work.
Are you talking at the individual school site level or a diocesan?
Oh, again, everything is individual. I don't have a diocesan because everything is, you talk about the pastor. I don't have a pastor. I have an inept board that's in control of everything.
I have a document. When we find time, I'll show you a document that I've got right now that I just want to learn more about. I can think of different publications that you could probably get at low cost, or some stuff that I have, but let's talk more about what we're trying to.
Yeah, and hopefully if they actually come together, then they would actually say, oh, let's look that we've lost half of enrollment the last 2 years. But they don't look at stuff like that. They don't look at the price. They don't look at.
As a member too, so I want to make sure that you're aware of this. So with Annie Smith having everyone's enrollment data, like to the T, this is why we ask for your data. She can pull number, what does it look like across the state, or how many schools in the state, or, you know, have schools of certain sizes, and what are their governance structures, like all those things roll up. So if you need those quick sets of data, you could say, hey, Annie, what does this look like in this neighboring state, or what does this look like over time for my diocese in the last 5 years? And those little things can help drive the conversations a little further. So anyway, that's available to you. So just make sure you continue to ask us for any of those pieces that help you make your decisions. You're all gonna have a list of things for Annie. She's gonna
Annie's gonna be like, she showed up Tuesday, what? I just want to awesome.
We can talk about your talk.
Yeah, this is why we we made sure we hired Annie an assistant, because she went from, for us as your data source, we had one person doing policy and data. Then we want policy, Sister Dale is our VP of public policy, and Annie is our VP of data. And it was really clear very quickly that Annie needed a data analyst, so we got our data analyst, and now we see the need of governance. So it is kind of exciting for us to be getting the requests and knowing that this is an area where the members want more support. Oh, like I said, it really is good when you are members and you do send in your information on a timely basis, because it helps.
Which I'm late.
It's okay. We know people are late. It's, you know, we know that. But.
Remember, this wasn't supposed to be a Catholic Guild session.
The never is the problem. There's a couple of pockets we never get the data from, and it's hard when it's missing.
Excellent. Well, we were going to be talking about member services as the next part of the chat, but perhaps we should take a couple-minute break right now, and then we have some fun news when you come back, so we'll keep it short. And I'll talk a little bit more about member services provide.